Party with your host, Dustin Rybka.
Hello and welcome to Sex Party. I'm your host, Dustin Rybka. With me on the show this week, Dr. Sheva Marcus. Dr. Sheva Marcus is a doctor. She is a sex therapist. She is also an author. We talk about a ton of things in this episode. She is an innovator in the sex field. One of the things that we chat about is scheduling sex, right? But also scheduling not having sex. It'll make sense once you listen to this episode, once you watch this episode, but it is reverse engineered. It's brilliant. You'll love this one. We talk about fantasy, how some women have shut off the fantastical part of their brain when it comes to sex. How can you turn that back on? We also talk about rape fantasy and how it's popular, why it's popular, where that's coming from, how normal it is, the fantasy where you're being overpowered. We talk about her book, Satisfaction Guaranteed, How to Have the Sex You've Always Wanted. It's a ton. It's packed. It's awesome. She's amazing. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Sheva Marcus.
This week's conversation.
Dr. Sheva Marcus, welcome to Sex Party. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. Can't wait to party.
Yeah. I'm glad that you're here. I feel like this was scheduled a while back. We rescheduled it just to make sure that we could iron out all the kinks and have a solid interview. I'm really excited for the audience to get to know you. On that tip, right? Like for the people who are listening, they're watching, what's this week about? Who are you and what do you do?
So you got my name already, Sheva Marcus, Dr. Sheva Marcus. I'm a sex therapist and the author of a book called Satisfaction Guaranteed, How to Have the Sex You've Always Wanted. But that doesn't really tell you anything about me. So I would say what I am and what I do is effective short-term sex therapy, because I'm so sick of the deep dives into trauma. Not to say that people don't have trauma that need deep dives, but this idea of making sex so freaking complicated, I hate that. And so I ran one of the largest sexual health centers in the country for 25 years. And what I've always done is really cutting edge in terms of combining the physiological, what's going on in your body, what you think of as medical, and the brain and the psychological. And people don't do that in any field at this point, in any medical field, but certainly not when it comes to sexuality. And people don't realize that your body and your brain are not separate. They're constantly working together. Your hormones and your medicine and your fantasies and your everything's working together. So after running the center for 25 years and, supervising medical professionals as well as therapists, I took all that knowledge and put it into this book about fixing your sex life, because I feel like women, I'm like passionate about women getting empowered to understand what the fuck is happening with their body and why things aren't working the way they want them to be working. So that's the book. And I see clients privately and I fix people's sex lives. That's what I do.
Well, that's amazing. There's a ton there, and I love that right off the bat that some of the best interviews start that way. With there's a ton of really interesting, different information, and here we go. We're on the roller coaster. We're buckled in. They know who you are, right? You said something incredibly amazing, where you said you almost like to get to the heart of the matter, solve the sexual problem quicker. I'm not sure what term you use because my brain is a fucking asshole and just forgets things real quickly. But you said you like to do it quicker versus taking the years and the months to stretch out the trauma.
Yeah, I just do not have patience for sex therapists, but sex therapists in particular, who want to sit down and talk to you about your mother and your father and your relationships and everything that happened in your history, when what's happening right now is that, you have pain and the pain is making it hard for you to have sex, or your kids are banging on the door and, you're been married for 5 years and somehow the magic's gone out and you don't know what the hell to do because you used to be like bunny rabbits and you're not like that anymore. Or like you're a little bit older and you're heading into like menopause, or you just had a baby. Like most problems for couples are not that complicated. Dustin, they're just not. And for therapists to sit down and have to take your entire family history and go into everything you've ever thought about sex is just irritating to me. And I feel like if we use a little more common sense when it came to sex, the world would just be a much happier place. And I know that people would be having better sex for sure.
Yeah, I mean, how could you be wrong in that approach? And I think, the mother, dad, daddy, I have famously, or I keep saying famously like I'm famous, but I've talked about it on the show.
You are famous.
I
Own
have
it.
no way. I have daddy issues, like where both my dads were just pricks or whatever. And when I would go to therapy, just normal therapy, not sex therapy, and be like, hey, I've got all this anxiety. Like, well, we need to, and I had that, they wanted to go into all of it, whatever. And I always like, no, maybe we just fix the fire that's burning first.
Yes.
And so I did find a therapist that was more like ERP based, where they,
And practical.
yeah, and pragmatic, where they're like, okay, we're gonna go. So it's interesting that you say that about sex, right? Because I think most people would rather have it your way than to go into the long stuff.
I mean, that's not to say that sometimes there isn't long stuff. Like when I start with a client, I'll very often say, as I do these like free, exploratory consultations to just sort of see what's going on, make sure I'm the right person. And I'll say, I think this could be a 1 session thing. Like you just missing information, or I think we could do this in 2 or 3 sessions. So, but this morning I saw somebody who I said, I don't know, we need to sort of sit down and figure it out. And at the end of the session, I'm like, you have completely shut down your erotic brain. You're just not willing or haven't been willing to think about things that are sexual because it's too scary to you. And that's not something we're going to be able to do in 2 sessions. It may take 6 or 8. Do you know what I mean? Like that's a deeper dive. So I sometimes therapists need to do that, as somebody who's been in therapy for a lot of years myself, but very often you have a specific issue that you're dealing with, like when couples, now I'm going to tell you like you'll get a whole bunch probably during the course of the hour, things that drive me fucking crazy. But one that drives me really nuts and may come up again is when couples go to a therapist, sex therapist or a regular therapist, and say, our sex life sucks. And the therapist says, okay, here you go. Let's get the communication all lined up. And once we get the communication going and the relationship's better, your sex life will follow. Well, that is bullshit. Like, yes, sometimes that is the problem. I'm not saying there aren't relationships that are, cracking and they need help to fix them before you can fix the sex. But sometimes the relationship is perfectly fine and the sex life sucks. And the problems in the sex life is what's cracking the relationship. So, if you go to see a therapist about your sex life and the therapist says to you, let's get the communication and the relationship on board and then the sex life will follow, you stand up, you run for the door, and you get the hell out of there as fast as you can. Just saying.
No, I love that because that is the sign of someone who's just going to stretch that out probably a very long time. And it maybe it's helpful, but it's, in all of the experiences that I've heard people with a sex therapist, with a coach, they don't have anything to leave that first visit or 2 with hope, with anything concrete to go and use, right? So in all that being said, and in your work, are you noticing like some of the simple, I guess we'll call them simple fixes, right? Like what are some of the things you notice that keep coming up? You're like, you know what? Your kids need to go stay with the babysitter on Wednesdays, or like, is it a certain thing, or she wants to try this kinky thing, you're not on board, we're going to try. Like, what are some of the things you're noticing that are common that keep coming up that you keep just putting them back in the grave over and over again?
Okay, so by far and away, the thing that comes up most commonly is disparate desire levels, right? One person wants to have more sex than the other. That is like ubiquitous. You see it all the time. It's really common. In most cases, it's the woman who wants to have less sex than the man, but not always. And honestly, when it's reversed, it's much more painful for people because somehow they expect it to be the other way around. So, but far and away, that is a major one. Another one is as women get older, their ability to get turned on and have orgasms gets harder, and that's really upsetting. Pain for young women when they're getting started is a major one. So those are, I would say, some pretty significant ones that come up again and again, but there's a ton. So yeah.
Yeah, and are these things, I don't want to say simply fixed, but like, are these things, is there a route to solve everything you just mentioned that doesn't take 7 months?
Yes. So, I think I do a great job in my book trying to outline all this, but I will tell you the difference in desire levels. And so often it's like a low desire on the woman's side, right? And I think one of the most important things for couples, if anybody's listening here, and I'm sure if people are listening, they're thinking, oh yeah, I never want to have sex. Like I'm sure there are people in the listenership that feel like that because it's just, we have it. There's really a sort of misunderstanding about wanting to have sex, that should be like this magic pixie dust that just hits us that we want to have sex, right? Like that is such a ridiculous notion, you know? So women who kind of not voluntarily, but spontaneously want to have sex, who wake up in the morning or waiting for their partner to get home to have sex. Yeah, I'll find you see that with like some 18 to 21-year-olds, or you see that in the first 6 to 8 months of a relationship. Often hormones, we can talk about that. The hormones are going bananas during that point, and it's extremely hormonally, driven. But that is just not reality. And so learning how to build sex into your life in a practical way, which sounds so fucking unromantic, Dustin. Like I have to say, yeah. So I often talk to people about scheduling sex. I mean, have you talked to anybody already about like scheduling sex or putting sex on the schedule? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that before I give you a whole lecture.
Yeah. So there's my throat. So yeah, we have talked about it a lot on the show. People seem to have similar yet different approaches. There's the weekly check-in. There's Wednesday, we're doing something different versus just, hey, I'm going to hit it from behind and whatever. So there's different approaches. Personally, I kind of love it. I just think having a window, right? So for me, I prefer personally with my partner to have sex somewhere between the moment that I wake up and put some caffeine in my body until like just before I eat dinner. If you get me after dinner, we're still going to do it. It's still going to be whatever. But like, having like hardcore, like pounding sex with like a belly full of chicken and sweet peas is not my ideal thing, And when I was younger and in the party scene, obviously like all of my sex was happening at night after drinking or whatever. And that was great too, right? But then I would notice the sex I was having during the day was like so much better because it was a little slowed down, right? So, I'm a fan of scheduling. I'm a fan of having at least having a window, right? So those are my thoughts on it.
So first of all, you're raising something that I feel like this, I don't know. We have this mythology about going out to dinner and then having sex. It's the stupidest thing. Like always have sex before dinner for all the reasons you just said, always have sex before dinner. Anyway, I think when you're talking about people who live busy lives, who have jobs, maybe have children, have, partners who have jobs, like you need to make time to have sex. If you do not make time to have sex, it's not going to happen. And so pretty much every sex therapist I know will talk about scheduling sex with your partner. And it sounds, it's like so funny. I'll get challenged people like, oh my God, that is so not sexy, Sheva. And I'm like, it's not sexy? Not fucking having sex. That's not sexy, right? So if you're having sex once or twice or 3 times a week and you're putting it on the calendar, it's going to happen. And if you don't put it on the calendar, it is not going to happen. And if you're the person with lower desire levels, you might need to get yourself revved up in order to have sex, as opposed to just waiting for the, desire fairy pixie dust to hit you to have sex. Like that just isn't going to happen. So I will talk to people about scheduling sex. And Dustin, this one's really like key. I will talk to people about scheduling not sex also. So when a couple comes in, should I keep going or am I just going on?
No, I love this.
I tend to have diarrhea of the mouth. So, it's like,
no, you can just mouth
just keep
shit
going.
all over the place.
Okay,
yeah. We're loving this. And the topic of the not sex is, I'm so intrigued.
Right. So very classically, I'll have a couple come in and it's like they're not having sex, or I'll have a woman more likely come in and say, I don't know what to do. He wants to have sex all the time. We're not having sex. And like, it's a mess, right? Because what's going on in her head, and your listeners are going to completely relate to this, is they have sex on whatever day. And then there's a clock now in her head saying, oh my God, it's been 2 days since we've had sex. It's been 3 days since we had sex. It's been a week. Oh my God, I need to have sex. It's been 10 days. I don't want to have sex. Like, anyway, that's what's going on in the lower desire partner's head. And the high desire partner is like, I don't know even what to do anymore. Like if I approach her more aggressively, she gets irritated at me. If I don't approach her at all, thinking give her space, she'll come to me. She doesn't come to me. If I try to be funny about it, she swats me away. If I do the dishes, because I think that's going to help, nothing works. And I'm going out of my mind at this point because I have no idea what's happening. So that's number one. And the other thing that comes up every time in this relationship, in this situation, is the high desire partner, let's call it the husband, will say, not only are we not having sex, but she's not even kissing me anymore. Like she's not snuggling, she's not kissing me. And the woman's like, well, of course I'm not snuggling or kissing you, because as soon as I snuggle or kiss you, you like come in for the, and legitimately, right? Like, because now the husband thinks, oh, maybe she's actually open to having sex right now because she's kissing me. So it's a mess and everybody's angry at everybody and it's not working. And I will say, here's what I want you guys to do. I want you to schedule sex, let's say once a week for right now. Pick a time that you think you can both be available. Let's say Saturday morning. The rest of the time, sex is off the table. So now the poor husband who feels like he's never going to have sex again and never does not have to whine and dine and beg and plead, which feels horrible. It just feels crappy to be in that position, right? And the woman doesn't have to have the clock in her head because she knows she can kind of prep herself for Saturday morning. It's a good time. She's going to be there. She's going to be there with a positive attitude and be involved with it and have fun with it. And she also knows that the rest of the week she can snuggle up naked in bed and put her arms around him, where she could kiss him and she could bring back that level of intimacy without him necessarily assuming I want to have sex now. So I will say to a couple, this is what you do for the next couple of weeks, ironclad, Sunday morning, Saturday morning, whatever you decided, you're having sex. It's an hour of time together. It doesn't necessarily mean intercourse, and we can have a whole conversation about intercourse versus sex, but you're going to have sex for like 30 minutes or 45 minutes. And the wife is going to come to it with a positive, happy attitude. If that means prepping herself by watching porn or listening to something erotic beforehand, we can talk about that too. That's great. And the husband's not going to feel like he's going to have to wheedle it. And the rest of the week, they can be as loving as they want and not feel like it's expected. And I feel like it just cleans up that garbage that's on the top. Lets us let go of that in a way that's unbelievably helpful. And sometimes that itself massages out a lot of the other issues. And eventually over time, I think people morph into like a soft schedule, not like sort of like what you were talking about, where, well, we'll talk about that. Anyway, I just could keep going on and on and on. But so I feel like that's a hugely, hugely effective way I'll use with couples who come in with, different desire levels.
Yeah. And I think, my first question to hearing all that is, once you tell them sex is off the table for the week until Saturday, then do you find over time that they start to have sex because they're not supposed to, right? Like, is there that temptation?
So what I'll say to couples is, I'll say to the husband, sex is off the week, the rest of the table. Do not assume that anything she does means she wants to have sex, other than if she turns to you and says, I want to have sex, right? So, because what happens is if either part breaks their part of the bargain, like if Saturday morning comes and she's like, whining, or she disappears, and then he feels like, okay, wait, this is like, that's not the deal here. But if for the rest of the week she comes in for a kiss and then he sort of makes a move on her, then she starts to feel like, okay, that wasn't the deal. And I don't feel safe being sexual with you or being like intimate with you without it turning into a sex. So sometimes it does. Sometimes the women will say, wow, yes, when it wasn't no longer expected of me, I now was happy, willing, and wanted it. But usually what I find is that it just keeps expectations good and clean and fun and not stressed for people for a few weeks. And then we can shift it. We can say like, move into a soft schedule, which I'll talk to you, or move into a soft schedule, or maybe you want to schedule twice a week now, or you have once a week and another time a week. You know what I mean? Like, because here's the thing, Dustin, when I talk to couples who've been together for many, many years and still have a good sex life, I will ask them, like, when they hear me talking about scheduling sex, they'll be like, scheduling sex, who the hell schedules sex? And I'll be like, oh, okay, well, just tell me like when you have sex. How do you have sex? And invariably they will say something like, I don't know, we have sex once on the weekend and maybe once on Wednesday morning because I work from home. Or I don't know, maybe we don't let more than 3 or 4 days go by. Like, they have a schedule. They just don't fucking realize they have a schedule. And that's really, I think, successful sex lives are built on what I'm calling a soft schedule. And to think otherwise, to think that you're just going to wait until the spirit moves you, well, you know what? It ain't going to happen. You know, you're running off to some vacation, or you're coming back from some business trip, or you have 3 deadlines at work and you come back and your partner's fast asleep. Like, it's just not going to happen otherwise. That's my experience. Do you feel otherwise?
No, I love the Saturday morning satisfaction, right? Like I think the Saturday morning satisfaction or the schedule, right? I think that's and then the rest of the time is off the table. I haven't heard that yet, and I think that's I'm not surprised because you're a genius, but I just think that that is something that it's almost reverse engineered, right? Because
Yes.
which is really, really smart, and a lot of people aren't doing or thinking about. And I think it works. It sounds like it works, wonders, because I would think that in that, like I said, that the couple would like, ooh, we're not supposed to be doing this. It's only Wednesday. Let's try that thing. Or maybe we don't have full sex, but like there's always, when you take something away, it's no longer allowed, and this is sort of a trick I learned with anxiety or OCD is like when you're no longer allowed to feel a certain way or think a certain way or do certain things, all of a sudden, wait a minute, the reverse happened. So I think it works. It sounds like it works wonders.
It's amazing. And you are 100% right. Like almost every sex therapist I know talks about scheduling sex, but I'm the only one I know who talks about scheduling not sex. So yes, I totally think that that's true. So
yeah, you got to use that dark matter in there. You can't really see it, but there's space, right?
Yeah, like white letters, there's black letters on white page, but the white page is important too. So
exactly. Yeah. No, it's so awesome. And I think with sex and lack thereof, I think we always, as a culture, we go to the working parent or the parent or how they're so busy. And you said earlier, like kids knocking on the door and like, causing distractions. And so the married couple or the couple, whether that's 2 people or 4 people or whatever, are not having as much sex as they should be, or they want to be rather. And I think what we miss lately, at least what I'm seeing a lot doing this show, is we miss people who are ambitious, right? Like someone who is trying to put out a ton of content. Their mind is like, constantly on their podcast. Am I talking about myself? Maybe, I don't know. But or like someone who is working a job full time and maybe has anxiety from that. And nothing is ever good enough because the internet is constantly moving its algorithm. So I feel like a lot of therapists don't talk about people who are younger or older or middle-aged who are just ambitious and they want sex too. But how do I stop fucking thinking about how many likes my fucking reel got, right?
Okay, you are making me, I have to talk about this mythology that I don't know where the hell it came from, the last 5 or 10 years, especially youngish women, although all women, I don't know, have been told you need to be relaxed. You got to empty your mind. You got to focus on the present. You got to be fully present. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like that, I don't know any woman who is working, juggling, running 6 podcasts and 4 social media, companies, and is going to be able to quiet her brain, and so they come in and they're like, well, my boyfriend and he sort of tries to quiet my brain and I try to quiet my brain. I'm like, just forget quieting your brain. I don't even think that's helpful. I think that the idea is you got to get your brain onto stuff that's sexy. That's what it is. You got to still fill your brain, but you got to fill it with sexy stuff. And this is really, fascinating because women think they have to slow down and take a bath. And I'm saying like, no, we got to get your sympathetic nervous system. For a lot of women, like exercising is super helpful for exactly that reason. But, thinking about sexy things, fantasizing, learning how to fantasize, which, as a guy, I don't know if you realize how, guys, I think tend to fantasize much easier than women. I'd actually be curious on your opinion on it. But I feel like I spend so much of my life sort of teaching women how to use the erotic part of their brain and how not to shut down their fantasies because they feel so guilty about their fantasies. I'm just actually curious what you think about the male woman thing here.
No, I love that. I want to hear more about it. I think, well, I think you're right. I never thought about that actually, but I think males, we're just, constantly, most of us are just constantly horny and gross.
It's
And
not gross.
well, I I don't know. For me personally, I'll jump on that grenade. My shit's like really gross. And I will come up with, I'm such a psychological sexual person. For me, I love getting nudes, but I think sometimes getting like a raunchy text is something that I would masturbate to versus the pictures in most cases. For me, like I will, ever since I was a kid, right, having those first, sexual fantasies about like my teacher before I even knew what sex was or whoever it was, right? Moving into where I am now, like I will invent like really intricate, twisted, dark sexual fantasies in my brain, and then have those sort of playing around with like masturbating or role playing or whatever. Regardless, they're in there, right? And so I think I've never been one, especially now. I'm too old to like feel bad about whatever. So I don't have like if something really crazy comes in there, super taboo, I'm like, you know what? Instead of thinking I'm crazy, I'm gonna explore this, right?
Yay!
So like
Yes.
that's where I'm at. So I could see where that point is correct, where maybe women do feel, because I feel like women. And I think potentially, hopefully, we're breaking a little bit loose from that now. But I think, growing up with all the sisters I grew up with, and my mom, my grandmother, and basically being raised by my mom and my grandmother, it there is that level of, you're not supposed to like this. There is that level of, that's fucked up, and ooh, you're a minx, or you're a, because you have that thought and whatever. So yeah, I can totally agree with that.
I mean, I think what you're saying is, and what's so powerful about what you're saying is that you realize that your fantasies are your fantasies, right? Like, this is so hard. I don't know, Dustin, when we got in our society this crazy inability to separate between fantasy and reality, right? Like, can you have any women I have coming into my office and saying, I fantasize about women all the time and I'm afraid I'm a lesbian. So I'm like, okay, well, first of all, that would be fine. But second of all fantasizing about women means is that it turns you on to think about women. It does not mean that you actually want to be with women, right? Like, if somebody comes in and says, they're fantasizing, and the one I comes up again and again and again is the being overpowered or forced to have sex, right? Women uh, across the board often get turned on by those fantasies and hate those fantasies and feel like they're wrong. And how could I be thinking that? Because I don't want to be raped. And like, what am I a crazy person? Right. And I'm like, wait a minute, just hold on, guys. Like, when did we get this idea that your fantasies bear any resemblance to what you want in reality? Let's take a classic, like somebody climbs in the window and ravishes you, right? You have created the person or people who are coming in the window. You have decided exactly what they look like. You decide exactly what they're saying. You decide exactly what they're doing to you, when they're doing it to you, how long they're doing it to you. And the minute you want them to freaking stop, they stop. They are puppets in your brain, right? What resemblance does that bear to a real rape situation? Nothing, zero, right? So we have to realize that fantasies are like, they're a gift. We can move into our head in any situation. And that doesn't mean we want it to happen. As a matter of fact, we may even well not want it to happen. It just means that we want that it turns us on. And sometimes I wonder, I think about our language, like the paucity in our language for like, we don't have good words for fantasies because, I don't know, it's maybe New Zealand that has like 20 words for different sheep or something. And, Hebrew has a million different words for God. So, but like when we say fantasy, when you say fantasy, when I say a fantasy, do we mean something that seems really hot and sexy that I like to think about that I want to actually do? That could be a fantasy. Does it mean something that there's no way, like going to Mars on a spaceship and having sex with the Martians? Like, I don't actually think that's going to happen, but it turns me on, right? Are we talking about stories we want to talk to our partner about, like something that's like something we want to share? Are we talking about something private? Like, this fantasies play so many different roles. And I think there's almost nothing, except maybe vibrators, which is as important for women's sexual satisfaction as fantasies. But where men don't seem to care. They'll focus on, they'll fantasize what you said, like gross shit. I don't think it's gross. I think, I was arguing over whether is it really gross or not. If it turns you on and it feels good in your brain, go for it. Like not gross. But women they start feeling guilty when they're thinking about people besides their husbands or their boyfriends, which, I'm like, are you kidding me? So you're going to be with this person for like, please God, let's say you're going to be with this person for 50 years, 60 years. I mean, I just celebrated my 40th anniversary. Hopefully there'll be another, 20 years in there. And all I should ever think about is my husband. I mean, I adore him, but like, seriously, like that's ridiculous. And he doesn't only think about me, you know what I mean? So like, I think we need a society to free women up a little bit to like explore their fantasies, be free with their fantasies. And then you're going to have the women who are listening to this who say, well, but I don't fantasize. And that has to do with the fact that we've shut that down and you have to learn how to like get those gears going the other direction. So yeah.
No, I think everything you said is is generously amazing and very intelligent. I'm just like creating my own sex language right now, but that's okay. I can do that. I'm a podcast host. A couple things that you said, right? One, congratulations on 40 years. That's fucking huge. So congratulations.
It is, and it's partially due to our fantasy life.
Yeah, well, so there we go, right? And two, the rape fantasy or the consent, non-consent role play, whatever. This is something that I think is way bigger than people give attention to because it's too taboo or whatever. But that's what we do on the show with guests like you is we flesh this shit out, no pun intended, right? That fantasy, women talking to me in my personal life back in the day, around the show now, in relationships, that to me seems to be one of the biggest female fantasies that I've come in contact with is being overpowered by a group of men or a stranger or whatever. I mean, I've played that one out where it's like consent, non-consent, where you sort of like whatever overpower your partner or whatever in a fantasy, playful role play way. So I wonder if we could talk more about that because that is brilliant and different and new that you said you're creating that person in your head and you have the stop button and you can stop at any time, same as it would be with a partner that you trust, right, to role play these things out. And I think people do think they're gross and wrong and dirty and evil and whatever, and I think how do we reintroduce with that one in particular that like, hey, that's just like an animalistic, wild, fun thing that you're doing.
Well, let me actually reframe it and say this. Maybe thinking about this will help women when they think about it. By far and away, now every woman has different fantasies. So I don't want you to, if you're listening, to feel like, oh, my fantasies are different. You're different. That's fine. But far and away, most women's fantasies focus on being desired. That's what turns them on. They're really, really, really wanted, right? Like, and what a force fantasy or a rape fantasy or an overpowerment fantasy does is basically it's translating this person wants you so badly that they're willing to sort of break the taboo, break through the window, right? They need to have you, right? There's other people probably at the bar. They need you. And that is so hot for women, right? Like that is so hot. That's why also women will talk about using, their fantasies where like they're trading sex with a policeman to get out of a ticket, right? Like anything that makes it clear that they are wanted, that their body, that their sexuality is wanted. And that is really, really, that's why, like those women's like bodice ripper books, all the books about like the captain of the ship, or 50 Shades of Grey, right? Women want to be wanted and they want to be wanted by good, strong men, right? They don't want to be wanted by the nerds. They want to be wanted by men, but they'll be taken for the nerds too. But, so that is really, and that really falls into, that's why a lot of women love, fantasies about being watched, through a keyhole or on the street or, because it makes their men have desire for them or women will have desire for them. And that's really powerful for women. So I don't know if that helps reframe it, but I just want anybody listening to know, like, so freaking normal. And so give yourself permission, like stop with beating yourself up for what you're thinking about. Like, it seems like, Dustin, you've come totally to peace with what you think about. I wish women could do that. Right.
Yeah, and what I hope with the show is that people watch this and like, Jesus, this guy, oh my God. But then maybe after a couple episodes, they're like, well, because people are gonna
You're
say
honest.
what they're gonna say, and to be honest, about being honest, like that is my only superpower that I can count on is just my consistent ability to just tell the truth, whether people like it or not. And so the negative comments that I get, the positive comments they all get equal attention with the reposts. And I think it it didn't happen overnight for me. It just took me a while to and that's kind of why I felt great about starting this podcast. It's because it's like I know that each episode I'm gonna have that conversation. I'm gonna ask those questions and I know they want to hear the answers to that maybe no one wants to ask or no one wants to whatever. I'm cool with that. So with that in mind, because this is perfect, you mentioned there are women who have completely shut off that side of their brain, the ability to allow themselves to fantasize. So with someone who is as open as I am, and a male, right? And then a woman who just can't fantasize anymore. Like, how do we get them? How do we mix those two? Like, what's your
Prescription.
like your quick prescription, right? Because without taking 9.5 months, what how do you get them there quick?
So first of all, Dustin, I think one of the things you have going for you, which you might not even realize, is that you're talking about sex all the time. Like the more sex is on the brain, the more it's on the brain. And I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of neuroplasticity, but the idea is that your brain basically is very, very efficient. And if you're not using a part of your brain, it shuts that part down. It doesn't kill it off, but it shuts it down. So that means that the nerve endings aren't firing and the synapses aren't going and the blood's not flowing in the area. And when that happens, that whole part of the brain just shuts down from misuse, from not using it, not misuse, but disuse. And so like an example would be like if you're a French speaker and you speak French and you talk French all the time and you're totally fluent and then you stop using it for 10 years. Well, it's there, but if you try to use it again, it's going to be like really uncomfortable and clunky and rusty. But then the more you use it, the better it gets. And that part of your brain comes alive. And you know what? Learning Spanish becomes much easier too, because that whole part of the brain is functioning. And I think that's true about the erotic brain as well. So when you stop thinking about sex and you stop fantasizing, that part of the brain just kind of goes quiet. And what people don't understand is sometimes it's uncomfortable and you actually have to actively get yourself to start fantasizing in order to get that part of the brain going again. And people, again, this magic pixie dust, people think of fantasies as something that should come to you. What do you mean I have to work on fantasizing? What the hell does that mean? And I'm like, you know what it means? It means that we got to figure out together what erotic material is going to get you started thinking about sex. So that could be stuff you read. In women's case, often it's reading that works. Listening, there's some really good apps now where you can listen to sexy stories being read, or watching if you're, a visual person. In general, they say men are more visual, women like to read more. I think there's some truth to that, but everybody kind of has to figure out but you start by exploring the things that turn you on without judgment. And that's really, really hard for people, right? Like, somebody will say like, I'm reading and like, oh my God, like 50 Shades of Grey, right? Like women love 50 Shades of Grey. It's all BDSM. And like, they're like, well, how could I have liked it? Like it's, again, it's bondage and domination. I'm looking at your face and you're like, oh, that's child's play. So, but for some women, that was like pretty intense, right? Or people are reading about, older men, younger women, whatever it is that what you need to start doing is reading, watching, or listening and start to figure out what things just get you a little bit turned on. And then you start looking deeper, digging deeper at those things and starting to move those things into your brain, right? Like my goal with my clients always is, yes, porn, erotica, whatever is great. Sexy literature is great. But I want you to have a film strip in your brain or a sound strip in your brain or a story going on in your brain, right? So we need to figure out together, why did that story turn you on? Like if you read a story about, a guy watching a woman through a keyhole and that really turned you on, what about that turned you on? And would it be more exciting to think about the woman on a Broadway stage with 100 guys watching her? Or would that be less, So the trick I talk to women about is figuring out what concepts, themes, pictures, snippets, phrases turn you on and start moving them into your brain. And I'll tell people, you have to exercise. It's like exercise. You got to get up in the morning and you got to, you found like a story or a video or something that turned you on. I want you to watch it for 3 minutes every morning. And then I want you to just get that erotic part of your brain functioning. And then during the course of the day, if you see something that catches your eye, an underwear, billboard, a hot person, a hot woman, somebody smiles at you and all of a sudden you feel like, oh, little flicker there. Pay attention to those flickers and then build them. Like, stop ignoring. Don't say, oh, I just had the sexual thought and I'm in the supermarket buying zucchini, so it's totally inappropriate, right? That's not like, yes, you're in the supermarket buying zucchini and you're going to stop and you're going to give yourself 15 seconds to actually feel if that's showing up in your body somewhere, right? Like, it is a process. And then once you get the gears going, then it becomes much easier. And I will add, especially for some people, as you get older, as your testosterone drops, for women as well as men, sometimes that makes it really hard. So I'm a very big believer in hormones here, just throwing that in.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's something that has come up once or twice on the show as well. We haven't really delved into it. And again, like you said, a bunch of really incredible things just now. And it makes me, so why would a woman's brain, I mean, yes, lack of use that would, but what would be the catalyst to a woman's brain shutting the fuck down completely? Would it be like shame because of what she liked and no, I'm not doing that? Would it be her parents, her partner, or?
So if it's if somebody's always been like this, then you say it was shame, it was the parents, it was the background. But I find it often with women post-college, to tell you the truth. Like, I feel like they're busy. They're doing a million other things. They're not having that much sex. They're not like you doing a podcast where they're talking about sex all the time, right? They're not really making space in their life to watch sexy things, If they're lucky, they watch Bridgerton and it turns them on, but for the most part, they're just not paying attention to those things. They feel like it almost feels childish sometimes to women. Like, they're not trying to keep their fantasies alive. Like, they used to be able to fantasize without trying. Now it just sort of disappeared. It sort of slowly waned away and they never noticed,
Yeah. And so is that why when something like comes out of the ether, out of nowhere, like Kim Kardashian's ass, and her sex tape, and like 50 Shades of Grey, like trilogy of books, these things that are normally like, oh, that's dark, no, that's wrong, but all of a sudden they're like popular and like, yes, everyone's like quoting them on Jeopardy, like,
I mean, I feel like 50 Shades of Grey was so helpful to so many women, but it was, I had a client who was seeing me. She was coming out from Albany at the time, and I remember saying, she was reading 50 Shades of Grey. She said, well, I didn't want to read it on the way down because, she said, because I wasn't about to have sex, right? Like, I'm saving it for when I'm about to have sex. I'm like, whoa. Like, I think that encapsulates the problem, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want to save sexy thoughts for when you're about to have sex, right? Because then your brain can't flip on and off the way you want it to be. You should be thinking sexy thoughts as often as you could be thinking sexy thoughts, right? Like, I think, so when something comes in that sort of hits us over the head with something that turns us on, we finally pay attention. But in most cases, we don't. And what's sort of so weird, Dustin, is that we live in a time where, like, there's sex all around us, right? Everything has sex. But I don't know that people let it in. They don't, like, they think it's inappropriate. Like, they're seeing a really sexy billboard, but they're like on their way to work. So they don't stop and say, oh, let me get turned on. Because they think of it as something they should just do. They just want to get turned on when they're about to have sex. Well, you know what? That doesn't work. You need to let your erotic brain function and grow. And then when you want it, it's there.
Yeah. I mean, I do feel like, that's what was sort of the impetus of my question, right? Is that, like, we're taught not to talk about whips and chains at the dinner table and or wherever, right? And we're don't comment on how fat someone's ass is and all of these things, right? But then all of a sudden on a Monday, BDSM and gag balls are taboo, but on a Wednesday, every woman on The View is talking about how good these and horny these books are, and it's just okay, right? Like, on a Monday, we don't talk about asses, but like on the Wednesday after Kim Kardashian and her family made $1 billion on asses and have a weekly show, it's okay. So are we just like,
but it usually fades. For most average women, these things sort of come and go. And what I'm saying is, average woman, you need to actually actively fan your erotic brain. You got to work on it. You got to keep it going. You got to pay attention to it. Like, don't wait for those moments like the Kim Kardashian ass or the 50 Shades of Grey, which comes across like once every whatever, how many years. Like, you need to be building a stock of fantasies, and you need to be encouraging it and nurturing it.
but when the culture at large embraces it, when The View is talking about asses and whips and shit, right? Then does that then help women that maybe are stuck because they're seeing Barbara Walters talk about fucking...
Maybe for like 10 minutes, if that happens to be something that turns them on.
Yeah.
But it's not going to have staying power unless they realize that this is something they need to actually actively participate. And yeah.
Yeah. Because society, culture is you talked about it a little bit earlier, but like, it is a tricky thing. It's like, hey, this is wrong, but doesn't it look fun? Hey, this is fun, but it's really wrong. Like, so it's hard to, you are getting all those messages from now social media, but like billboards and your husband and your whatever.
Right.
It's like, what the fuck?
But nothing is wrong in your brain. And I feel like that's the most important thing. Like, what fun? Nothing is, fantasizing is cheap, free, it's like free, you don't gain weight from it. You don't like make anybody angry. It's just happening in your brain. Why don't we enjoy it, embrace it?
Totally. I want to get into the time machine really quickly and go back to your origin story a bit, if you don't mind. What kind of person were you growing up, and how did that lead to you realizing that this was the work for you? And any stories or anything that you have that the aha moments and all that, we love that shit. We love hearing how Captain Marvel got her powers, so like I'm assuming there's a really great story there. So how did you become who you are in this field?
So yes, this part always flips people out. So I grew up in a Jewish Orthodox household. I still am in the Jewish Orthodox community. I've gotten myself into lots of hot water, and you can imagine, right? Because I'm like 62, and 40 years ago, or 30 years ago when I was doing this, there were no other sex therapists in the Orthodox community. Now there are, thank heavens, but you're walking through a landmine, and I have been blown up many times in that landmine. I grew up with zero sex education, was so pissed off about it, and like felt so insecure about it, and really think that deep inside of me, I felt like something's got to change. Like, we've got to do a better job. And I went into a different field. I was working in a community organization for a while, and then ended up working for a while with a urologist who did male sexual functioning. And that was just the time Viagra came out on the market. And Viagra, I don't know if you know, to me, this is fascinating. Viagra, 1997, before Viagra came out, this field of getting guys erections was like so lucrative, right? There were research companies, there were highly paid specialists. There were like, there were doctors and researchers and pharmaceutical companies. Everybody was making a fortune off of getting a guy hard, bottom line. Then comes along Viagra, and for an $85, trip to your doctor, he can hand you this pill that will work in 70 to 80% of the cases, right? So now that entire industry basically collapsed, right? There was this huge industry. And so what happened? Those guys looked around and they were like, what are we going to do? Oh, women. Maybe it's not all in women's heads, right? Like maybe there's some issues here with women that are not like all psychological. And so, I was fascinated by that. And I was working in a place where I could build this medical center. So we basically were at the very forefront of like women's sexual health, where we were looking at all the issues, like how to solve pain issues. When you have low desire, is that hormonal? Is that your birth control? And how do we work with women psychologically to get all those pieces in place? And so, basically I built that center with no information, right? Like, it was a brand new field 25 years ago, and it's come so far. There's still so much we need to know, but like that kind of is where I came from, right? Like this idea of, wait, guys, maybe it's not all in women's heads. It makes me so mad, like 25, maybe now 35 years ago, if you were a guy and you couldn't get an erection, they would have sent you to a therapist, and you could talk till you were blue in the face. But if you didn't have, your blood flow wasn't okay, and it wasn't, being able to be trapped in the penis, you couldn't get an erection. So talking to a therapist for 2 years was not going to help you. And so I feel like we need to acknowledge with women that could be the case with women too. Like you can talk to them about the fact that their vagina hurts, and you can say your vagina may not be ready for intercourse, but you know what? Fuck it. They have tight muscles. Those muscles have to be addressed, right? Or their birth control pills are changing their whole hormones in their vagina. So, it changed me. Basically, it changed the way I saw the world. And like my not having any sex education and my feeling like there was nobody. And when I look back at like my early married life when intercourse killed me, and nobody, and there was nothing wrong. This was the doctor said, there's nothing wrong. That's what happens to most women. Nothing wrong. Well, 20 years later, I figured out what the fuck had been wrong with me, So all I needed was somebody who actually knew what they were doing to help me. And in every case, we can change people's lives. Like sex is so important. I mean, you know this, you're doing this podcast, you know this, but sex is about how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about our relationships, how we move through the world. And when we're feeling unempowered because we're not educated or we don't have the right information, like it's wrenching, it's gut wrenching. And so I feel like a person who's out there trying to change that, really change that.
Well, it's obvious you still feel that same fucking fire that it started you. I mean, you can hear it in your voice, you can see it in your face. I mean, all of your work on Instagram is. I mean, obviously, I was researching you a bit on the road to this interview, and like every time I went to your page, I'm like, fuck, this is great because not only do I know what I'm getting with these tips and with this information, but it's consistent, it's fun. She's a great speaker, she's really smart, so it's like you can tell that you have that same fire that you started with all those years ago. That being said, do you think that we are moving as a culture, as society, as a world in the right direction for women to have better sex and understand their psychology around sex and their understanding, or are we sort of stagnant?
I don't know, Dustin. I also feel like people are so the thought police have gotten so strong in so many ways. And people are just scared to express themselves like in a weird way. I feel like opening up to us, being open to all different kinds of sexual preferences is amazing. But when you start cutting out people who aren't interested in those preferences, it's more of a problem. I don't know, Dustin. I'm not seeing, I can't say that I'm seeing a great revolution. I'm not seeing the younger women more in touch with their sexuality, more free with their sexuality. The younger women seem more obsessed with like what they call themselves, kind of like, like what category they're in. And I'm just like, be freaking Dustin sexual and I'll be Sheva sexual. And like, let's just explore what feels good to us,
Yeah. Yeah. I think the labels, it's hard to be just ambiguous about, or at least for other people to accept people who are ambiguous about, I like this some days, other days I like people are just really, really super, super weird about that.
But that's so human.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That's so human. And
Yeah.
to expect that Sheva's going to like the same thing at 19 as she liked at 35 or at 60, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah. And a lot of times I think as you get older, some shit gets wilder too. I mean,
Yes.
we never talk about that. I mean, sometimes I feel like, well, I'll
go ahead. Just say it.
Yeah. I mean, so back in my club days, right, when I used to do nightclub stuff, and I will not go into the history of that because they've heard it so many times, but there was like, older, and when I say older, I was like 25 and they were like 42, right? And they were so much wilder than the 22-year-old girls. They were so much like more in touch, in tune. Not that the 22-year-old girls sucked, right? But it was just that these women, and a lot of them were teachers, a lot of them were like professors, like all of that, at least they were the wildest women out there. And I'm like, shit, okay. Are they more in touch? Are they more in tune? So like, and then as I'm getting older, everyone's like, well, your libido is going to go down and and that just, and maybe that will happen and I'll have to run for the Viagra or whatever. But for me, physically, psychologically, my shit's getting like darker and more fun and like more wild, and I'm hornier than I've ever. So I just feel like we don't ever talk about, as you get older, it can get a lot more fun and a lot more dark.
And even if you feel like your desire is not where it would be, or your erection's not as hard as it used to be, like those things are easy. Those are easy. You know, there's testosterone, there's Viagra. Getting your brain in the game to like allow you to do the things you want to do and be the sexual being you want to be, like that's so powerful. And I do think that frees up as you get older.
Yeah. And also too, you mentioned this a little bit, but your sexuality will just reveal these little secrets about who you really are. And I think that's such a beautiful thing that people look at it as like a box, like, oh, I need to bust a nut today. I need to get off, or I need to pleasure my partner or whatever. But like, if you look at what you're looking at and why you're looking at it and what you're masturbating to, what you're thinking about, what you're writing about, what you really want to be doing, I just think that influences more than anything else. It's like, to me, sex is like rock and roll. It's like film. It's like any sort of good art, right? It just tells you so much about who you are and how you choose to move through the world, right?
Yes.
Nobody talks about that.
No, I think that is really powerful. I think that that's true. That's what I always say to people. I didn't go into this field because I'm so fascinated by body part A and how it fits into body part B. Like that is interesting. And we could have much conversation about that. I'm interested in what sex does to a person, what it does. I'm so interested in like what sex does to you as a human being and what sex does to your relationships outside, even as much as like flirting. I talk to people about catching people's eyes and smiling and flirting and like lighting up yourself and lighting up somebody else's life as well. And I just feel like the things we think about, the things that attracts us, the things that we become interested in, they shift. And what you're saying is so true. Like we change. And I don't know why people expect that people will stay the same sexually when they change in every other way, right? Like, can you imagine that somebody handed you like a suit when you were 22 and said, you're going to wear the suit for the rest of your life. And it doesn't matter if you gain weight, lose weight, grow 3 inches, rip out the not like sleeves anymore, decide you don't like blue. Like this is your suit. Like, why do we do that with our sex lives? I don't know, Dustin. And it's time to like rip that up. So.
Well, let's start ripping it up by taking this last piece of the episode and diving into your book, right? Because everything I've seen about it is incredible. Everything that every piece of content you've put out around it, for the YouTube viewers, like there's a poster behind you. Tell me what really fired you up to write it? When did you write it, right? And what is the book about? What is it addressing? Were you scared to publish it? Were you excited?
It took me 8 freaking years to write that book, right? And what kept pushing me was I would get calls from women from different parts of the country or the world who couldn't come into our center, and the problems were not that complicated. And I felt like women should be empowered to know that they can fix almost every sexual problem that comes up. And so the way the book is divided is into 4 sections: desire, arousal, orgasm, and pain. And I start with this really cute, easy questionnaire at the beginning, so you can kind of score yourself on those things and kind of see where you might want to start. And I built it like a choose your own adventure. Like if you come out with a really low score in arousal, try chapters 7, 11, and 12. If you come out with pain, just go right to chapter 6, 4, whatever, 4, 6, and 3, whatever. And what I wanted to do was give women a handbook on how to freaking fix their sex lives. Like that's it. You can how to have the sex you always wanted. That's the name of the book. I truly, truly believe that everybody can have the sex they want. You just need to have a little bit of know-how and a little bit of like information and a little bit of permission. So that is what the book is about. And I hear from women constantly how helpful it's been. And it's really, that makes me really happy.
Yeah, I would imagine. Let's give them the title of the book for the audio people.
Satisfaction Guaranteed: How to Have the Sex You've Always Wanted.
And they can find it, I'm sure,
on everywhere. Amazon.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know. It's my website, Dr. Batsheva, anywhere. I mean, my website's going to send you to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, but yeah.
Totally. I mean, so it took you 8 years, but was that like just getting the research, or was there, because on this show, even like with this podcast, like I had this idea about this podcast and I sat on it for 1.5 years. Like
Yeah.
why? I don't know.
Why did it take me 8 years?
Well, was it a fear thing? And how did you push through?
So fear thing is interesting. No, it was like how to frame it. Like I had all the information and I've been working with women for years, but I wanted to package it in a way that was really manageable for women. And I couldn't figure out how to do it. And I would start to write it and I'd be like, oh shit, this is boring the hell out of me. So if it's boring me, I'm like, not even, so I needed to figure out how to package it in a way that was fun, interesting, made it sound like I was sitting across the table from you. So there was that. And then also I didn't know the first thing about getting a book published and sold. Like I didn't know what the hell I was doing, to be totally honest. So, anybody who's listening, if you want to write a nonfiction book, you actually come up with an outline and then you sell that. I didn't do that. I actually wrote the book because I had no idea. And then, finding an agent, I found the world's best agent who was amazing. And I was just really, really, really blessed and lucky. But I remember sitting on the sofa crying because all these years while I was writing it, all these people were like, oh, let me know. I have an agent when you're ready. And of course they all collapsed when the time came. You know what it's like, Dustin, right? Okay. So, and I'm sitting on the sofa thinking like, what am I going to do? Just send out query letters, which is what I did. And honestly, I had great reaction. So, writing a book is scary and fun and overwhelming. And I'm so glad I did it. And I am never, ever doing it again.
I was just gonna ask, is there another book on the way? But we understand.
I'm on social media now. It's easier, way easier. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still a lot of work though. Doctor.
Oh, totally.
No, I mean it's a lot. I mean, and I have a love-hate with social media, especially now because they're censoring all of us sex creators. My original sex party account got taken off, and I had
off where? Off Instagram?
Instagram, yeah. They
really
claimed that I was soliciting people sexually, and then Wired magazine just put a huge article about this extermination that Instagram is doing with sex creators. It's pretty nasty. So
it's fascinating because I feel like my growth is slowed, and I thought, and maybe that's it. I have no idea. Yeah.
I think I've heard that there's been a lot of people on the show that are actually really, really big creators who were maybe up at 500,000 followers, and they got their stuff taken away and they had to start over. And so it's like we're all sort of dealing with this, and it's just why the church didn't get far enough, so now you guys are taking the reins. Like what the hell?
And also there doesn't seem to be any distinction. Like people are putting up stuff that maybe doesn't go through their like crazy radar, but is really, really could be detrimental of misinformation. And then there's those of us who are giving actually really helpful educational information. I'm like, really, guys? My original TikTok account got thrown off. I was Dr. Sheva on TikTok. I got tossed off, and now I'm the Dr. Sheva. Somehow they're leaving me alone. So
and that's just like why. I mean, Instagram doesn't work without ass, number one, and Instagram doesn't work again if you don't know how to use that ass. So like, let us fucking talk about it, you fucking jerks.
Right.
Dr. Sheva, thank you so much for being on the show with me. Seriously, this has been incredible. I've enjoyed all of this. I can't wait to have you back. If you'll come back, I would love to have you back.
Of course, I'm back. I never miss a party. So
okay, well, then you're in the right place. Let's tell these wonderful party-going people where they can find you, where they can order 10 copies of the books, they could dump money out and say, help me. Where can they find you?
10 copies of the book so you can give them to all your girlfriends or the people who love them. You can find me. I have a website, Dr. Sheva, and the same thing for Instagram, DrBatsheva, Dr. Sheva. And as I said, on TikTok, I'm the Dr. Sheva because I got tossed off once. So, but I'm there all the time. I try to keep my stories going. I try to answer DMs. If people have questions, I try to answer them in stories. So I really, really love and use these platforms as education. So I'd love to hear from you.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here. We will get you back on very, very soon. Dr. Sheva Marcus, thank you so much. Huge thank you to Dr. Sheva Marcus for being on the show with me this week. Go check out her on Instagram. Go check out her website. Go buy her book. Buy a copy for your friend, right? If you guys are loving guests like Dr. Sheva Marcus and you want more guests like her, if you want to see her again, if you're just happy to be here and part of the party, how do you show that love, that appreciation, that desire for more sex party? If you want to, you don't have to, but if you want to, how do you do it? Well, I'm glad that you asked. If you are listening to this on platforms like Apple and Spotify, you could subscribe to the show. That's the most important move that you can make. You could also leave a rating. You could leave a review. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, I love you. I see you. I appreciate you. You can subscribe to the channel. You can like the video. You can leave a comment. As always, you can reach out to me in the DMs on Instagram, and I will see you right back here next week.
Thanks for listening. The party continues next week. Click subscribe and let's make this a regular thing. Follow the show on Instagram and Twitter @SexPartyFM. Follow Dustin @DustinRybka.